Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to the people like you. So, with us on the program today, we're going to be talking with Michael Madrid. And as a reminder, we're doing things a little bit differently now. We're switched to our recorded fashion compared to our live stream. So, we've broken things up into 3 parts for you, as well as a complete video as well. In today's conversation with Michael Madrid, he is a congressional candidate for New York's 10th district. That might sound a little familiar as we've talked to both Lindsey Boyland as well as Jonathan Herzog in the past. He's running as a libertarian against Gerald Nadler. And in our conversation, we get to hear about, a little bit about his background as a computer programmer and a biker and lover of karaoke. We then get to talk about his policy platform that I have to tell you, I've never agreed with a libertarian so much. Obviously, there's a couple disagreements here and there, but there's a lot to be loved there, such as, making sure that we reform our zoning laws, to basic income, to the simple fact that we need to be pricing carbon accurately into our economy. And then finally, we get to talk about, what's it going to take for the Libertarian Party to be seen as a real threat to the actual duopoly. So there's so much good stuff to enjoy. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope you guys will consider actually supporting his campaign against Gerald Nadler. So let's get into it. Okay, we're here with Michael Madrid. Michael, how are you doing today? It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Doing wonderfully. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, we wanted to be able to talk to you today because we got to talk to several of the people in the New York 10 race because they were primarying Gerald Nadler. And,
Yes.
You're running in the New York's 10th congressional district. And I figured, I think there is some overlap with what we believe here on the network and some aspects of libertarianism. You are running on that line. And so I wanted to just, get to know you today to hear where we might have some of that overlap and hear more about your campaign. But before we go into anything politics, I think people would love to know just like a little bit more about yourself. What were you doing before you decided to run for office or potentially are still doing while campaigning?
Yep. Okay. Well, I am for the most of my professional career, I've been a software developer. I've come in and out of the field several times. I guess I started out teaching English in Japan, went into software in Japan, did finance for a while, went back into software, then went to a PhD program for economics at UCSD, graduated with a master's there, and then came back into software again. So that was what I was doing pretty much until I started campaigning. I have had a lifelong interest in economics, and that is part of the reason why I am running. I know we don't want to get too much into politics, but why I'm running and who I am are sort of part and parcel. So it does come up. Let's see, where were we? Yes, software development.
So what
economics? Sure.
So Michael, what type of software development were you working on? What types of projects did you do as a software developer?
Sure, I've done a lot of things over my career. I've been an architect. I've been a consultant. Did a lot of front end, full stack stuff. The last project I was on, we were doing some machine learning, something called a oh God, I don't want to get into it too much, but it's called a multi-arm bandit algorithm. I don't know if you know anything about A/B testing.
No, I know a little bit about it. I don't want to get too much into the weeds for the audience, but one of the things that we obviously talk here a lot about is that we're not fully defined just by the work that we do. There's so much more that we do outside of it. What are some of those activities that you spend your time outside of work doing?
Okay, well, I've always had a deep interest in, economics is an interest as well as something professional, but history, I like battles a lot too, I will admit to. So all the various strategies and tactics which are used, very interesting stuff. But history, I have been known to sing karaoke maybe on occasion. Languages and the languages in the karaoke, I sing various songs in various languages and like to speak them too, even when I'm not singing. Soccer has been a big part of my life, but something as I get older, I've done a little less of. You unfortunately get injured, and then you.
Yeah, I know that. I played soccer myself.
Oh, did you? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've ripped my Achilles, tore an MCL, and each time you do, you're just a little more hesitant to go back onto the field. And so I'm trying to get back into it, but it gets harder. So the bike, I really enjoy biking. So that's something where you're generally, even if you occasionally fall, it's less catastrophic. So
Yeah.
that's
I gotta say, it sounds like a lot like my father. He's a developer himself and does a ton of biking. But I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite karaoke song?
Oh God, what day of the week is it? What month?
Thursday. So let's say it's Thursday. What's the karaoke song
Oh,
today?
geez. I have sung so many karaoke songs. I found out that the favorite list on my favorite karaoke places karaoke app is 300 songs, because that's how many I had my favorites list. Recently, I'm a little older, grew up in the 70s, 80s. Recently, I've been singing a lot of Neil Young.
I can dig some Neil
A lot
Young.
of, a lot of great songs there. Hurricane is just, some people don't like it because there's just this long, like 2-minute part. But, if karaoke places were open, that would be perfect for me, because I could just spend 2 minutes explaining my whole platform to people while we're
Right.
waiting for the song to resume.
I know that. See, there's so much that has been detrimented this cycle from just not being able to come in person.
Yep.
And so, one thing I'd love to ask you now, kind of, we're going to start exploring a little bit of the politics side. Is you're running on the Libertarian Party line, and so I'd love to ask you, what originally drew you to becoming a libertarian?
Well, as I mentioned, economics is a big interest of mine, and I've really found the beauty of free market economics. This kind of like judo thing where it is not you making the policy, because you cannot know what the correct policy is, and you're just kind of letting the market work. I mean, the invisible hand doesn't always work, indisputably, and there are definitely things like externalities, pollution, which we have to figure into things. But if you can get those things right, in many, many cases, you can just let the market work. And it is individuals expressing their free will, whether as a producer or a consumer, getting to vote whenever they choose to spend whatever dollars they have. And it just, is much more efficient than these big, ambitious projects which people have. So it was really realizing the beauty of how these things worked when they do work, and how well they work, that has been a big part of libertarianism for me. On the other side, I've never really understood, some of the prohibitions on what some people consider vices, sex work. I never understood that. Drugs, a lot of people use a lot of drugs. I think anyone who's honest will realize that a lot of their friends and a lot of their productive friends use drugs. And it doesn't always have to be this life-ruining thing, this addictive thing. There is addiction. There are problems we have to deal with addiction, but addiction can take many forms. Alcohol, certainly, which is legal. So I think it's important to separate, things like drugs and things like addictions. So I've never really understood the prohibitions on a lot of the sort of personal freedom side. So, between those two, I think you're pretty much going to be more of a libertarian than any other party. Especially now, Republicans used to be somewhat free market, somewhat free trade, and
a little bit less now. Yeah,
just a little bit,
a little bit less. Yeah. So I think we're going to find a lot of common ground on some of those like social policies that you had mentioned. Sure. And I think, frankly, when we go into our second part here, it's going to be interesting to explore and flesh out a little bit more of that economics, because I at least appreciate that you recognize that there are some of these externalities in the market that we do have to consider, and that not every single market works perfectly well in a free market sense. Because I think we can agree in a lot of parts it would be better if the market was free. But I just think I agree with you. Some markets, that just does not work well. So
Yeah.
we'll take a quick break, and
Very
then
few,
everyone,
but
yeah, so
we'll get into it.
yeah, we'll certainly get into that. So we're going to take a quick break. Join us in part 2, and we'll be going into a lot more. So, guys, we'll take a little break and be right back. Okay, we're back. We've been talking with Michael Madrid. He's a congressional candidate in New York's 10th congressional district, running as a libertarian against Gerald Nadler. So, Michael, we were talking about like who you are as an individual and what inspired you to get into libertarianism. And we started to flesh out, some of those key reasons. I'd love to hear, now what are some of those top policies in the campaign? You obviously alluded to a lot of the social side beforehand in eliminating some of the prohibition, but can you talk me through some of what the economic policy that you're looking to address in your campaign?
Sure, absolutely. I have an overarching theme, which I'll do last, but some of the specific things, one of the things that got me into the campaign was joining a housing group here in New York, and really getting into the nuts and bolts of, why do we not have enough housing for the community? And why are rents so high? Why do we have homeless problems?
Yeah.
If you go into housing problem, you realize there are huge numbers of barriers to building the housing we need to build. One of the big ones is zoning. Lots of the United States, you cannot build multifamily housing. It has to be a single family house on a lot with a minimum amount of space, and you have to have a parking space. And even when you're building multifamily, often you have parking requirements. A lot of times when you are trying to build housing, there are lawsuits which can last for decades. And this is whether it's market rate, often even here in supposedly liberal New York, affordable housing projects get blocked because it's going to ruin somebody's view or something.
Yeah.
So there are just huge amounts of market barriers here. To the extent in New York, in the last 5 decades, we have not built as much housing per decade as in the 1930s, the Great Depression. And one of the very pernicious effects is people just do not believe in supply and demand anymore for housing. They think housing is a different market and that you cannot have a case where rents go down. Well, guess what? COVID just hit, and we see when demand goes down, the price goes down. We could have been doing this for 5 decades just by building more housing. So that is, housing is one of the big issues. Another very local issue, which a lot of housing, I'm sure you're familiar with the YIMBY movement.
Yeah.
So YIMBY housing is by far the biggest movement, but the idea is for urban cities like New York, we want housing, we want density, and we want good transport. And part of that is mass transit, whether public or not, but also bicycles, scooters. all the newer forms of scooters, the newer forms of transport. So as mentioned, I'm a big cyclist. My bicycle is my main mode of transportation, so I would like to see much better biking infrastructure. Now, you might think, well, that's not really a local issue, and you might think that with housing too, but housing is definitely a national issue. It was on every presidential candidate's
especially
platform.
right now. Yeah,
absolutely. And when you're a congressional person, a congressman or woman, you are voting on things like highway bills and how much to allocate to other things like transport. So other big issue. Third one you're going to like, I think, basic income. That's one which I came a little late to. Originally, I had 4 policies. I did not have basic income. But when you realize it, when you think about it, when you're a very free market economist like I am, free markets are great. They, are wonderful at cutting costs and producing innovative products, and the cost is continually going down. Quality of the product, the variety of the products is continually going up. But it is extremely disruptive. People have their careers disrupted, the factory closes, the mine closes. So basic income to me, and not only me, Milton Friedman actually was a big proponent. not your typical, progressive or,
Godfather of conservative
socialist.
economics. Yeah.
Yes, but he was a very big fan of a basic income because he also realized that people don't. The market is very haphazard. It's very random, and people need a safety net. And basic income. The other nice thing about basic income versus we have huge amounts of social programs out there. Nice thing about basic income is you give money, and the people can decide what they need to spend on. It's like how much they spend on education, how much they spend on food, how much they spend on housing. Some people want a smaller house and want to eat a lot. Some people don't really care. They can have mac and cheese every night, but they want a little more space.
Yeah.
So,
I've been there before.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the good thing about, just giving them money to tide them through times when they're not working or for whatever reason, is that they get to choose what they need. So that's the third policy. Just really quickly on the last two, decriminalization of drugs and sex work. I don't think, that's pretty self-explanatory. And the final one, green the market. I believe we need, I believe the market is the best solution we have to fixing pollution. Part of that is just getting rid of some of the non-market stuff we have. We still, even in 2020, give subsidies to fossil fuel companies. Why? Farm subsidies. Farmers are big polluters, and they, to produce food, maybe you need some pollution, but you should not subsidize them on top. So we get overproduction of food. The military, huge polluter. There are other reasons to cut the military. But cutting the military will also decrease pollution. And the final thing, the thankless policy, because libertarians don't like it, although Milton Friedman, invoking the shield of Milton Friedman once again, was comfortable with it. But pollution pricing. And you have to say pricing, you can't say pollution taxes, because certain people get mad when you say taxes.
It's a trigger word for some people.
Trigger word, yes.
For libertarians, but yeah.
But really, the libertarian has something called the non-aggression principle. When you're polluting, you are ruining someone's life. And, even beyond, greenhouse gases, you can believe it or not believe it. I do believe it. And I don't believe 100%, but I believe that the probability that we have it is big enough that we need insurance and very robust insurance. So, put pollution pricing, any carbon, methane, anything contributing to climate crisis, to global warming, put taxes pricing on that, and anything contributing to health. Coal is very bad. It creates asthma and all these other things. Anything which is causing a bad like this, an externality, as an economist would say, should be priced. So, and especially for pollution and for things which are going to warm the planet. So that green the market is the official code word, the official phrase for that, but that is my fifth policy. So those are the 5 ones. I've kind of subsumed this all. I think all of these, maybe not the transport part. The free our streets is the official code word there, but maybe that part is more transition than a simplification. But with all these other things, I think it is a simplification. Take 97 or 100 need-based social programs and just make it a basic income. And with housing, just get rid of all these barriers, let the market work. With green the market, price the pollution, get rid of these subsidies. And then, we don't need, the big car plan, which is part of the Green New Deal and these other things. Just get rid of all these barriers, let the market work, simplify. Simplify is
I wholeheartedly agree with the idea of we need to do some simplification. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not necessarily a libertarian, but I couldn't find something that I disagreed with on your policies there. So
okay. Well,
I'm
wonderful.
very happy with that. So rather than having a back and forth of disagreeing, I'd love to ask you some clarifications on some of those policies. So the first part on housing, I'd love to hear, obviously we were talking about zoning. What do you think could be done on a federal level to impact this zoning? Because as you said beforehand, a lot of it is perceived as a local issue.
Yeah.
What could be done from the federal level that you'd hope to address?
Yeah, well, it's basically, I mean, a lot of what has to be done is, or what's been suggested has been withholding funds if localities don't choose to change their zoning laws.
Mm.
So, it's kind of, some people think that's, what would you say, blackmail?
A little coercive, but if it does help change it for the positive, I don't see it.
On the other hand, yes, and on the other hand, if you are taking the money, and that is something, then you should be doing policies which are really helping the country. So, but yes, there you can do that. There are limits if the locality doesn't want your money and decides it just is dead set against this, then there's often not much you can do.
They have that right, yeah.
But certainly, were I to be a congressman and even just running it and getting these issues out in the open, it's converting people one by one so that localities do have more people who are aware of damages that zoning do. And could be a lot of people who are complaining about Trump's wall. They say, well, we're open to everything. Just don't move into my neighborhood because it's perfect and I don't want you to ruin the view. And there are going to be too many people and all the cars. Wow.
There is a little bit of an irony to that. I certainly hear you. So let me go to one of the other policies that I like, but I want to have some clarification because I think universal basic income, you're absolutely right. One of the big priorities of our program. I'd love to hear how you envision structuring.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll say first off, I'm not a universal basic income guy so much as a basic income guy. I think, though, what you'll agree with is we want a robust safety net which takes care of everyone who needs it. There are some arguments that it should be for everyone, and even Jeff Bezos should get 2,000 or whatever we give. I'd just like to say I much prefer the NIT, negative income tax, which we can talk a little bit more. But for me, getting that robust safety net, if that's something we can afford and Jeff Bezos gets money, I'm fine with that, if that's the only way to do it. And I would ask the people who are dead set on UBI to say, if the only way we're able to protect people and is affordable to society is that Jeff Bezos doesn't get the money, then I would ask them to consider maybe loosening their stance a little bit.
Sure. So I can understand that. I think that's a reasonable compromise. Yep. My only concern, which is why I like the universality aspect, is I think something that I think a lot of libertarians could agree to too is we don't want to have necessarily as much government bloat and administration if we don't need it. Yep. And by doing any form of means testing, that means you're going to have to fill out some form of an application to be able to get into the program, or you're going to have people reviewing past tax records to assure that you are qualified to receive it. Yeah. And I personally would love to reduce that type of administration and simply administer the taxation to make sure that the distribution is appropriate.
Yeah.
Do you see a difference in that universality versus means testing approach?
I do agree with you that it's a burden and it's, certainly not as simple. And as you know, I like simple. Yep. But if we're giving it to 50% of the population versus 100% of the population, or even 40 and 60, that's a huge amount of money. I think with that huge amount of money, we can overcome the technical issues. We already do withholding tax, and there's no, I guess you don't really call it means testing. It's just a formula, right? And they take out a certain amount. Why couldn't basic income be like that? If you earn a certain amount in a certain month, then, you get a certain portion added. If the next month you go gangbusters and you do really well, then maybe you get some of that taken back. So I think, with the huge amounts of money we're talking about that we would save if a significant portion of the population who doesn't need it is not getting it, I think we can overcome the technical hurdles. But as I say, if that were if that were something which we couldn't do, then I'm amenable to the other way. But I think, we have to, all of this is complicated, and all of this is, dependent on so many other things. Even the amount, how much, what are housing prices, what are healthcare costs, all this is dependent on a lot of things. And, the important thing is to be pragmatic, to work through, what is going to work, and, go from there. So that, I think we always have to not say, that's why I prefer to say basic income versus UBI and NIT. Just, let's have the goal front and center. And then, even within UBI, there are a huge amount of choices to make.
Yeah.
So
I wholeheartedly agree kind of with that approach. The last question I wanted to ask on this specifically is, balancing that NIT and even that kind of as you said, it's a lot of money that we're giving because you want to have it be more of a basic income. Yep. I worry that it kind of creates a similar effect to what we have with our existing means tested welfare system, which is that you start having some incentives to, not work as hard because now you're going to lose some of that benefit. Yeah. So in your mind, do you think that is a myth that people will, still look for that work regardless? Do you feel like that is a fair criticism?
Well, I mean, there might be some people who won't, but I think in any system there are going to be some people like that. I mean, I know if say we had a negative income tax up to $40,000 a year and at 50%, so if you don't work at all, you're guaranteed $20,000 a year. I know I'm going to be working. I know I want more than $20,000 a year. I think most people probably would too. So there are going to be some people who aren't going to want to work, but a lot of those people, maybe they'll find a different way to do it anyway. Maybe they'll find a job where they can freeload and get paid and a lot of money and not really do very much. I mean, we've certainly seen cases of nepotism and other things like that. So I don't know. I think it's very hard. Most of the research I've seen says that this doesn't happen on a large scale. And as I'm saying, it's absolutely going to occur at the margins. There are going to be some people where it does affect that, but it doesn't matter if a small amount of people are doing that, as long as most people are ambitious and want to get ahead and want to earn more than what the basic income is going to afford them. And I think that probably does describe most people. So, and the research I've seen says that does describe most people. So,
okay, I think that's fair. Let me ask you one more policy question before we go to our third part. So, one of the things that I see as a market that has inherent flaws for being a market system is healthcare.
Well, no, don't say healthcare.
Yeah,
yes, you're right. You're right.
It's a very price inelastic market where people are going to still be demanding care because it's a life or death matter for some, and they're going to be willing to pay whatever price they have to pay. How would you want to try and address healthcare? Yeah.
Okay. Let me say, first of all, healthcare is hard. Anyone who says I have a pat solution to this is probably trying to sell you something. Now you say healthcare is life and death, but it is not always life and death. Sometimes, even something like hip replacement is not life and death, and it is not an emergency. It is something where you could conceivably, if we had a market for hip replacement, you could look at on Yelp and say, wow, this guy has wonderful reviews and he's actually cheaper, or is cheaper than the other guys. That's the person I'm going to. So certain parts of healthcare is life and death. We could probably insure that. I mean, car accidents are life and death. That's why we have car insurance for those cases. A lot of healthcare is not life and death. And how do you classify stuff like LASIK or cosmetic surgery, where they have markets? They're certainly related to your body. I would think hip replacement is maybe a little more like LASIK than it is like where you're
quality of life improvements. Sure.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Healthcare is very hard. It is not a perfect market. Consumers are very bad. You're probably only, hopefully, if you have a heart attack, you only have a heart attack once in your life. So it's not something where, every few years you move apartments and you know what you want in an apartment and you know roughly what, the various qualities are of it. So yes, healthcare is hard. It's hard to be a good healthcare consumer. On the other hand, the government systems you get, it is very easy for special interests to insert themselves into the process and decide, well, this is what you want, not the other thing, because we are bad consumers. So I think, what's a mistake which is often made when talking about government versus private is that you're always assuming this perfect government system with, perfectly selfless and all-knowing bureaucrats or politicians to design the system, and that is almost never the case. And that is why I don't think we're ever going to get a perfect. I mean, we're never going to get a perfect anything in this world, but why a healthcare market is going to be a lot less perfect than buying your favorite knickknack on Amazon. But whether a government system is going to be better than that, I think it's open to doubt. And I am not completely convinced that the market is going to be better in all cases. We do see very successful universal healthcare systems in other developed countries, but they all have trade-offs with what we have. And many people make the argument that we're both more expensive and our care is worse. The care is worse part, I think is very hard to qualify. And the cost part, some people recently have pointed out that the U.S. has various qualities, various conditions which are more expensive that other countries don't. And specifically, they point out gun violence, car accidents, obesity, drugs, and tobacco. And that is not going to go away whether you have, market-based or single payer. So how we address those is, part of the discussion. And it's, as my friend Jason Shafran, he does a site called Healthcare Economist. He went to UCSD economics with me, but I've talked to him about this a lot, and he says, yeah, it'd be great to be able to attack those things, but personal choices or personal habits are very hard to change. So
I totally agree with some of the points that you're making, that I don't think we're ever going to have a truly perfect system. But I think some of the reasons why I tend to gravitate myself towards, a Medicare for all, not necessarily what the exact plan that Bernie has, because I don't want to do duplicative coverage ban as he has. But the reason why I kind of like that system is that, yes, as I said, the life and death stuff. But the other thing that's important is that, it's a simplification. We don't have a lot of freedom in the existing market when we have our existing insurance model that says, this is in network, this is out of network. Now, you can go to whatever basic service you basically need.
Well, tying it to employers in itself is just a huge, healthcare should be between you and your healthcare provider. And if you guys want to do it, a lifetime contract, like a life insurance thing or whatever, you should be able to do that. There's just so many barriers to, doing contracts like that. So that's one of the reasons.
And I would say the other part that I wanted to mention is that, some of these quality of life improvements, I actually think it's good for us to be funding these things, because I think people, when they are healthy and we do preventative measures, our overall costs decline. Rather than having that emergency room visit, you can hopefully help someone live a healthier life. Or that person who has a hip replacement, maybe they're old, maybe they do need to retire, but some people, we would like them to go back to work. And so I think that would certainly help them be able to do that more productively. And the last point I'll make on that is that, when we've seen some of the studies compared to our existing system, we've seen basically this one study, the Mercatus study, which was basically like a meta-analysis study on several other, cost analyses of the current system versus what this single payer system would look like. And roughly on average, you're finding a $5 trillion saving over 10 years. And so I don't want to necessarily get government involved in the provider side.
Yeah.
I do think the funding side should have some consideration.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's what the Mercatus.
Actually, you're right. The Mercatus study said $2 trillion. I'm thinking of the Northeastern study that was the meta-analysis.
There was the Lancet. There was the Lancet study I know, which was cited. The Sanders campaign actually did say that the Mercatus study said you would save money, and then the next day the Mercatus said you just cherry picked one little part of our study that said under ideal conditions this would happen, but in reality it's going to cost $30 trillion. So
yes, compared to a system that would have cost 32, though. That's the difference.
I don't think. I think that what they were saying was that this is going to be expensive. I mean, the cost estimates are all over the place, and if anyone can give me reasonable belief that this will save us money and it'll be simpler and all the great things we're saying, I'm on board. Healthcare is hard, and I am not coming at this with fixed ideas, but I think my suspicion is that the market will do better, and that a lot of the things we're doing to prevent the market, for instance, as we mentioned, the employer tax deduction, all the various licensing requirements from state to state, which, during COVID, we said, we're getting rid of that. Let's just get rid of it permanently, right? Yeah. Telemedicine. Before COVID, we couldn't do it. Hopefully after COVID, no one's going to say, okay, we're getting rid of telemedicine. Yeah. There are just so many, the hospital thing, what is it? Oh God, I always forget what it's called, but that you have to prove that you need to build a hospital before you can build a hospital. They have this in many states. That's just, crazy. The idea is that this cuts cost. How does this cut cost? I don't see how this could possibly cut costs, especially with all the, once the patronage, even if you had, if you had brilliant, all-knowing bureaucrats and selfless bureaucrats, maybe this could work. But, with the people we know who are in office, and manning these bureaucracies, no possible way that they could, do better than the market. People running hospitals have a very good reason to do it. There's demand there, and they can make a profit, which is not a bad thing if they are actually providing a useful service, and they are continually, and there's competition, and the costs are continually going down. So, it's, as I said, I'm not saying that there's no role for government. The AIE, am I getting it right? Yes, the AIE, American Enterprise Institute, has a plan, which my friend Jason likes, and he's convinced me to like. But that plan, they say, charge premiums based on individual costs. So healthy people pay less, sick people pay more. And the reason this is because when you don't do that, the healthy people just go out of the system. They just leave. They don't want to pay more than they have to. Now, isn't this very bad for sick people, particularly poor sick people? Yes, it is, which is why there is a role for government to subsidize care to those people. But the idea here, and this is something, basic income makes a lot of sense to me, because you're leaving the market alone, and then you're giving an income to people who need it, just because of the vagaries of the market. And this is, I think, something with healthcare too. Let the market work, let people be charged what they cost. But then for people who, really have a condition which is no fault of their own, give them the assistance they need so that they have the care they need. So that there are a couple other things of this plan, but that idea that let the market work and help the people who need help is, I think, it's a very powerful idea as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and you know what? I like the overall way you are trying to think through this system, and I think we'll have a discussion offline and we can try to share some citations back and forth around the studies to talk about that more. But with that being said, let's move on to our third part. We'll be talking tactics, so I hope everyone will come join us, where we talk about, it's great to have ideas, but how do we start actually get them implemented? So come back. We'll be right back to talk strategy. Okay, we're back in our final part. We've been talking with Michael Madrid, a congressional candidate in New York's 10th district. And so far, we've gotten to know about Michael, the person, and we've got to know about his platform. And I have to say, Michael, we've had a lot of agreement so far on what these top priorities are. I'd love to hear now, like, how do we actually start getting these ideas into actual reality? Obviously, one of the steps you're hoping for is, you got to get someone like yourself into office. But when you get into office, what do you think is going to be your general approach? There is not many libertarian within office. Justin Amash is right there now, but who knows if he'll be there for the next term. What's your strategy like to try and interact with the Democrats and Republicans to, get your agenda through?
Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to tweet a lot. It seems to be a very successful political strategy. So I think I can just do that and things will turn out fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about platform building. There's got to be some aspects.
Yeah, that's so boring. I don't want to do that. Okay, sorry. I will try to be serious. And realistically, my chances of getting elected are not all that great. Part of the reason doing this campaign is, even though my chances are not that good, I want to get these ideas out into the mainstream. And, they're somewhat in the mainstream, but I'd like to get them out more into the mainstream and spread them as much as I can. And I think that if you don't have any, none of these ideas really lend themselves to the political patronage that, they're just let the market work. That does not... when your constituent comes to you and says, I need you to help me get this bridge built because I have a cement company.
I feel like it's a little hand-waving aspect.
Yeah, it's like, sorry, let the market work. Yeah. Let the market work. So, geez, I'm getting sidetracked. But none of this really is something that is an incumbent, that someone in office is really going to want to hear. So it really has to start with voters. The pressure has to come from voters, because people like me are not going to run for office very much. Libertarians are getting a little more traction, but it's realistically it's going to be a while before we really get a lot of us in office. So it really has to start at the grassroots, and then how do we cross aisles? Well, I mean, it can be done. Certainly, Justin Amash had a bill on qualified immunity, and pretty much every progressive, he co-authored it with Ayanna Pressley. AOC was on board. Jerry Nadler, my opponent, was not on board. He decided to do a big, 20, instead of this one, very small concrete bill, he did a, 17 provision bill, which of course the Republicans are not going to like, so nothing gets done. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely libertarians we cross with progressives on a lot of the social issues. We used to cross with some economically conservative Republicans on economic issues, but a lot less recently, as we noted. But ultimately, this is something which, the special interests are not going to like a lot of libertarian policy. So it really has to come from the voters. And it has to be voters standing up and saying, yes, I really want things simpler. I want things more open and more accessible. And that is, a huge change in behavior, huge change in thinking. A lot of people really do think that we can have benevolent government, and I'm not so sure, but it's a very large change of thinking for a lot of people. So it's a long-term process.
And so, one aspect I'd love to know is, the past week we had our debate where you were talking about your support for Joe Jorgensen. Mm-hmm. I know obviously you're not going to see eye to eye on every issue. I don't think anyone sees eye to eye on every issue.
Especially libertarians.
Yeah, that's a common feature that is unique to both libertarians and progressives. We constantly are like, there's no true libertarian, there's no true progressive. But I wanted to hear, in your opinion, what are you hoping for her to do to help, actually grow the Libertarian Party? Because as you noted, even in your own campaign, it's kind of hard for a libertarian to win. And I think it's especially hard to win on a presidential level. What are you hoping that she can try to achieve during this cycle to help get the message out more?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think she's doing a good job talking and Spike too. And you mean in terms of tactics, what could she be doing more of,
What
less
do you
of?
think is the goal of her campaign? Obviously, there's the tweeting, as we said, that's so important. But like,
Yeah.
what are you hoping she can do to really bring the platform forward and make the Libertarians, in your opinion, treat it as a more serious party?
Yeah. I don't really know that I think what she's doing is good. She's doing the same things that I think she is trying to draw a distinction between her and the what we like to refer to as the duopoly of the Democrats and the Republicans. I think, for all us libertarians, as I said, we are saying do less, not do more. And that, in our can do American culture, that is not what people want to hear. They want to hear, there's a problem and I want you to go out and get a solution. And I'm saying, we're trying to say as libertarians, yes, but, really, we want you as the American to be the one.
Yeah.
The solution as the individual American, not as the American government who, has all these conflicts of interest and doesn't, know your business as well as you know your business. So, that's the message I'm trying to hammer, and I hope she keeps hammering that. And as I said, it's a difficult message for a lot of people to digest. I guess, one thing we can do is just inspirational stories, and we can certainly point to things like PPP, how that didn't go as expected.
Yeah, we have a little bit of a flawed definition of small business.
Yes. Even if you get the definitions right, there are these conduits. It's like, here we're going and whoops, what happened? Money.
Like, honestly, one of my pieces of advice is something that you already are embracing in your own campaign. Mm-hmm. I think embracing something like a basic income would go a very far way for the Libertarian Party, because I think the biggest critique I've seen, because, I tend to be a little bit more in a progressive audience, is that, libertarians just don't care about poor people. It's like, pull yourself up from the bootstraps, and it's like, hell, I can't afford bootstraps. And so I think that can go simply a long way. And furthermore, I think, as you said, some things in the market don't actually work particularly well. And I think embracing something like a carbon tax, where you're basically saying, hey, we actually care about the environment, but we want to do it in a market-focused way, I think also would go a very far way for the Libertarian Party. So I'd love to ask you, what would be needed? Like, obviously, there is a duopoly in place, and it's partly designed by the democracy that we have. What are some of those democracy reforms that you think are needed for the Libertarian Party to be able to rise and, have any chance of defeating the duopoly?
Well, God, I mean, we really have to get elected and sort of shrink down the government. It is just, it would be not. I mean, there's all sorts of talk about campaign finance reform and other things like this, but ultimately, I think unless you slim the government, while politicians have the power to dole out favors, the money is going to come, no matter what you do with campaign reform. You could say, it has to go through, limit the contribution size. Well, what is the big union going to say? Okay, guys, by the way, this is our candidate and he needs some money, so give him small contributions. And a company can do that too. It doesn't have to be a union, but there are just so many ways around this. So it really is a very intractable problem. And I don't say I really have good answers. The answer is really, besides what I said before, and that's just to keep hammering home the message that, a lot of your government is being subverted. A lot of this tax money, which you think, I should pay because I should contribute to society. That's great if the money is going to the proper place. If it is actually not helping and it's actually hurting, then please reconsider.
I agree.
And that, as you say, something like a basic income is, I think it's great policy. I wouldn't adopt it just as a selling point. I think it's great policy. Milton Friedman thought it was great policy. So I don't think it's anything a libertarian should be ashamed of adopting.
The way I like to frame it, because I get to interact with some libertarians.
Yeah.
I like to call it a tax on government. It's basically saying, you would have normally collected some revenue, and then you would have gotten to choose how it was used as a government official. Instead, it says, okay, no, you've collected this income, but now we, the people, are going to tax you and say, give it back to us. That way, it automatically shrinks the government because they have less to use because now it's in our hands.
Yep. And it's going to individuals. So, that's a...
Yeah. So the last question I'd love to ask you is, I've certainly had on the program a couple of candidates who were primarying Gerald Nadler. We had on Lindsey Boyland and we had on Jonathan Herzog. I'd love for you to make the case of why you think that they should be going to the Libertarian Party now instead of just defaulting to Nadler. They obviously recognize some problems, which is why they were serving there. But why should they come Libertarian this year and support your campaign?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, if you buy into the message of simplify and smaller government, and we don't need all these regulations, which are getting in people's way. Occupational licensing is one I didn't mention, but, just give a small shout out. But Gerald Nadler is not going to change anything. I mean, he's been in office 20 years. He is not going to rock the boat very much on any of the issues, even issues he supports. He supports marijuana legalization. Is he going to support psychedelics? How much is he going to do on sex work? He's not going to rock the boat. And issues like basic income, he is not going to, it's not even on his radar. Or the issues of housing and, bike lanes. Oh my God. The thought of Gerald Nadler having a thought about a bike lane. Wow.
Thought of Gerald Nadler on a bike.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't even going to go there. I'm just thinking about a bike, I think, is already too much of a stretch. So I think, he's been there 20 years. I don't think it was a particularly great 20 years or distinguished 20 years. And, he certainly is not the person for the next however many years. So I don't, there's not much of a case that needs to be made, in my opinion. But one thing I have talked to, because I'm on the streets a lot, and one thing I did have mentioned to people, which has resonated surprisingly, is just the thing we talked about before, is that Democrats often have this big bill, Republicans often have this big bill, and they just can't agree on anything and nothing gets done. And I say, I'm a software developer. I'd just like to break things up. Little bills, constant, steady progress on things we can.
That resonates with everyone.
And that surprisingly, talking to people who say, oh, I love Jerry. One person actually said he's perfect. And I did that argument and they said, that is different. And, will she vote for me? Who knows? But at least she took a brochure and said, I'd like to look at you further. So I think there are differences of approach as well as platform, which do make the case for someone who maybe has a software engineering background rather than a law background.
Yeah. I mean, Michael, I certainly have loved hearing your approach again. I will admit I was a bit surprised how much we agreed on policy, given that, I am a Democrat, you are a libertarian, and, I knew we were going to agree on some social policy, but I think we are a lot more aligned on economics than I previously thought. How can people be able to check out your campaign or other stuff that you want them to check out if they want to support you and like what they heard today?
Sure. It's Madrid 4.NYC is the website. And Madrid 4 NYC on Twitter. We don't really have an Instagram presence, but Twitter and Facebook. Madrid 4 NYC. You should be able to find me. And if you look up Michael Madrid, New York, you should probably be able to find me too. So.
Well, Michael, it was a pleasure getting to know you today, and I
want to thank wonderful talking to you.
Okay, well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we wish you the best luck ahead in your campaign.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for having me, John.
Thank you so much for watching today's episode of The Hill of Roses. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please let us know by liking today's video and sharing it with your friends. If you want to be notified of whenever a new video drops, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Finally, if you want to find more of our network's content, please go to thehillofroses.com. We have a ton of articles and comics being developed by our team. With that being said, we love y'all for helping us make this movement grow. And as always, we hope you are staying rosy out there.